We are back, and we are joined now by Connor Echols, reporter at Responsible Statecraft, the Quincy Institute, whose piece is entitled How a Little Known Embassy Aide Hijacked U.S. Israel Policy. Connor, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on, Emma.
Absolutely. So, you spoke to some State Department staffers who told you a bit about this man named David Milstein, who you describe in your piece as something of a pro-Israel enforcer in the State Department. Tell us a little bit about who David Milstein is and what his role is in the State Department.
Right. So David Milstein is a very interesting figure. His official title is a senior advisor to the U.S. ambassador to Israel, which is, of course, Mike Huckabee, who is a former governor and a prominent sort of pro-Israel member of the Republican Party. And Milstein's influence is interesting. He's also the stepson of conservative commentator Mark Levin. He used to work for Ted Cruz. He used to work with Ron DeSantis on a campaign. So he's very well plugged in to the world of pro-Israel politics. And he's taken on this really interesting sort of position as an advisor to an ambassador, but who's constantly sort of reaching back, trying to influence the types of press statements that are being put out by the State Department, trying to insert controversial terms, trying to remove criticism of Israel, and on one occasion even appears to have gotten someone fired. The thing that I lead the piece with, and that I think is one of the most striking things that he has done sort of in his time in the State Department, is that since there's no separate embassy to the Palestinians, all of the cables that come from diplomats over there have to go through the U.S. Embassy to Israel, and so there's often some political sensitivities. Some of the people that work on Palestinian issues were trying a couple months ago to send back cables about, the growing famine in Gaza, and Milstein stopped those. And in its place, he sent one that one official told me sounded like an advertisement for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And I'm sure your listeners don't need too much of an explanation of why that's not ideal.
Right. I mean, we're seeing reports of really, explicitly like Islamophobic kind of far right volunteers almost heading over in the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, enjoying the very fact that they can shoot at Palestinians who are hungry for aid. I mean, that's direct U.S. complicity in this genocide, in addition to, of course, our support for Israel. So, I mean, can you actually expand a little bit on the state of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, if you don't mind? Because
Sure.
people may need a refresher. This is the BCG consultancy backed, like mercenary led supposed aid distribution facility in Gaza, but they've been responsible for killing all these Palestinians waiting for food.
Right. So, yeah, I mean, there's questions, from a legal point of view about who's actually pulling the trigger in terms of these things. But the broad thing is that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is, of course, the organization that's been set up with support from the United States and from Israel to provide aid, in theory, to the Palestinians in Gaza. They've been widely condemned by humanitarian aid groups for a few reasons. One is that one of the core principles of humanitarianism is independence from either side of the fighting. And that's not like a woo-woo thing. That's not just because they care about this or that. It's because it gets people killed, right? When you are associated with one side or the other, it just encourages fighting around aid distribution points. And that's what we've seen, right? We've seen a bunch of Palestinians being sort of shoved towards these aid distribution points, given 15 minutes of actual aid distribution, and getting hurt, getting shot at by the Israeli military that's on standby nearby, or even, hit with tank shells, things like that. It's continued to be just a series of, I think you can call them massacres around these sites. And those continue to this day. And that remains really the main group that Israel and the United States are allowing to distribute aid within Gaza. So it sets up a very bleak situation. But it's actually interesting, too. Milstein is the subject of this piece, and he's a very important figure. People should know more about him. But another person who's interesting that came up sort of in passing, sort of played Milstein's role in the first Trump administration, a guy named Aryeh, let me find his name, a guy named Aryeh Goldstone, I believe. And he in the first Trump...
Lightstone, I have written down
right.
here.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, no
Thank you.
problem.
Aryeh Lightstone. And Aryeh Lightstone basically has in the second Trump administration been working with, the peace ambassador, whatever you want to call Steve Witkoff, and has been sort of serving as a go-between between the GHF and trying to convince the UN that the GHF's work is legitimate. Hasn't been very successful this time, but worth noting.
Well, especially because you have whistleblowers coming out and explicitly saying what the GHF is doing here. How is Milstein kind of intercepting these cables and filtering them through a pro-Israel kind of perspective? How is that unique when you compare it to the Biden administration? Because I know that there was reporting about Jack Lew, who was recently interviewed by Isaac Schotner of the New Yorker, revealing many things he probably didn't want out there, like that it's okay to, bomb Hamas members if their children are in there, he alluded to. Also, he was saying things like accidentally admitting that they wanted the Netanyahu government to stay in power, which was very revealing. But he also was, I believe, blocking some of his staff from reporting things that are critical of Israel. But according to your reporting, this is a step further.
Yeah, for sure. God bless anyone with the confidence to talk to Isaac Schotner. I do not have that confidence. Yes. But very good reporter, obviously. But no, so the one thing that's interesting, so I talked to Mike Casey, there are quotes from him in the piece. He worked in sort of the Palestinian affairs section of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem from 2000 to 2024. So he saw, or 2020 to 2024, rather. So he saw a lot of the ways in which this developed. What's interesting is that basically, when Trump moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, there used to be a separate consulate in Jerusalem that sort of acted as the pseudo embassy to the Palestinians. They had their own ability to send reports back to Washington. But then once that was combined and once it was made into one facility, that group was no longer able to send its own cables without consulting with the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Now, under Biden, they ended up actually giving some of that independence back, and they renamed, I think it was the Palestinian Affairs Unit. They made it the Palestinian Affairs Office. Sounds boring, but these are the things that make a difference in a bureaucracy like the State Department. And essentially, what changed there was that you had a group that could send cables specifically about the Palestinians, right, during that period. But the trick there is that Jack Lew, in his role as the U.S. ambassador to Israel, was still able to block reporting related to Israel. For example, reporting on potential war crimes committed by Israeli forces, right? So those types of things are not the remit of the Palestinian section. They're only the remit of the Israeli section. So he was still able to keep a pretty tight lid on information that could be explosive for, potential arms deals.
And so there's also this story you highlight in the piece about when Ireland was trying to take action against settlements in the West Bank, and it pissed off some people in Europe. Talk a little bit about that incident.
Yeah, for sure. So this one's interesting. This one, I'm relying on reporting from the Washington Post, so credit to John Hudson for this part as well. Over there, does very good reporting on these issues. But so basically, Milstein wanted to draft did draft a statement just condemning Ireland sort of flatly for even considering this type of move. But then wind, got to some American officials in Europe, and they were like, hey, what the hell is this, right? We don't usually just condemn our allies or condemn our partners for things that they haven't even done. This is the type of thing we usually talk about them behind closed doors with, right? And in the end, they were actually able to stop him from releasing that statement. So that's an interesting example of where something was sort of so outrageous that other members of the administration were able to step in and say, like, hey, we really can't do this. But there's a lot of other cases where it didn't go that way, right? You've got the case of he sort of took the State Department human rights report for Israel-Palestine, and he cut all of the criticism. It had already been approved by the Biden administration, had already been filled out by career officials, and then Milstein sort of takes a really long time to return it, and when it comes back, it went from 103 pages long, full of all types of criticisms in the year before, down to 9 pages long, and basically entirely emptied of criticism of Israel. So you can see those concrete effects.
Right. And I mean, even the other part, like he wants to have the United States recognize the West Bank as Judea and Samaria. Now, it seems like he has that in common with Bill Clinton, who was sent by the Harris campaign to D.C. to echo to Michigan, sorry, to echo those comments. But we don't need to bring up the election just yet, because it just pisses me off still. But like, that's extreme. I mean, moving the embassy to Jerusalem is a huge reason that October 7th even happened, because Palestinians felt like all diplomatic channels to their kind of self-determination were being cut off, and Hamas committed that, killed so many people in part to kind of jolt Israel into engaging with them again. And of course, we've seen the genocide since then. But like, when you're talking about Judea and Samaria in an official context with the United States, you are admitting openly and foreclosing the possibility of the U.S. being involved really in brokering peace talks. This is him endorsing a one Jewish state from the river to the sea, essentially.
For sure. For sure. And he's just he likes to battle with the Palestinian Authority. I mean, I don't think anyone here is a huge fan of the Palestinian Authority either, right? That's obviously a corrupt institution, but he sort of sees it as a goal to sort of isolate them and not deal with them. He's not someone that's interested in a two-state solution. I think that's totally clear. And even, like you said, the term Judea and Samaria, especially when it's used in English, is used by people who want to annex the West Bank for Israel. I don't think that there's too much question about that. So he's continuing to really exercise a pernicious influence. And you see, I mean, it's such an interesting example of what happens when an administration sort of waffles on policy issues, and it's often sort of unclear in interesting ways, and it allows these factions to fight with each other. And, he's kind of won internally, because you've got these MAGA people that don't have particularly strong, sympathies for Israel, but they've sort of lost out. Trump doesn't seem particularly interested in this. Like one concrete example on that is that Milstein allegedly got one of his colleagues, Shahed Qureshi, fired over disagreement over whether the administration opposed the forced displacement of Gazans. Trump and Witkoff have not really said that much concretely about that. They've gestured in directions, but that was something where there was clear possibility for debate within the administration, but that was not enough. Milstein, according to Shahed, went ahead and called up Marco Rubio's office and got him fired.
Well, Trump is now apparently giving assurances to Arab leaders and to Macron that he's not going to allow for West Bank annexation. So that, I mean, can't trust him at his word, but like that's a pretty direct contradiction also to the reporting we saw about Miriam Adelson's role in Trump's reelection, the amount of money that she donated to actually achieve West Bank annexation. You mentioned him being the stepson of Mark Levin. For many of our viewers are probably familiar with Mark Levin, although I guess he would have to be a longtime viewer because he's been around the block for a while. He's a Republican commentator in the vein of he's a Fox News old school pro-Israel guy. He's not the Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens isolationist version. The fact that he's his stepson is crazy, but Levin might be the biggest Israel hawk on the right in media.
Yeah, I think that's basically true. I mean, the thing, if people want to go back and see sort of the ways in which Levin tries to make his influence felt, a lot of it was over the debate earlier this year over war with Iran. You really saw him coming out very strongly and saying, we need to bomb the hell out of Iran. We need to destroy these nuclear sites, really throwing caution to the wind on potential escalation, on a new forever war for Americans in the Middle East. He's really just a guy who, he's a really emphatic supporter of Israel. He wants the U.S. to go along with not just like Israel in principle, but with specifically the policies of sort of the further right governments in Israel, with Netanyahu, with some of his further right ministers. So, you're seeing just, again, the pernicious influence of some of these different parts of the conservative movement. And it's interesting to see, you've gotten the response from the more MAGA types, responding to my article online a little bit and talking about, well, this is the Levin influence. You see the fighting happening outside, but this is happening inside the administration as well in interesting ways. It's just that, the pro-Israel side is pretty decisively winning.
Right. And I guess lastly here, what is your view on the State Department's role in the administration more broadly? There was some reporting under Biden that, especially towards the end, the State Department was largely sidelined in favor of some of like the direct White House national security and foreign policy consultants that are that has grown as the DC blob has grown in terms of like the importance of some of these people that are outside of traditional foreign policy and diplomatic structures. Is that a consistency from the Biden administration that perhaps the State Department is more sidelined, or is it too soon to say?
I mean, it's hard to say if the entire department is. I mean, the career officials are sidelined. They're thoroughly sidelined, right? That is the thing that you hear consistently. People who have been working for a long time. I mean, it super depends on the issue, right? I know that they have brought in technical teams for like some issues related to Russia, Ukraine at times, things like that. So there are some people with experience, but by and large, it's the political appointees at the highest levels that are really making these decisions. And when it comes to Israel and when it comes to sort of these issues that are particularly politically salient, that's where the political decision makers are the ones that are actually in the room. And yeah, I mean, when I was talking to people for the story, they said, obviously, that's when it comes to Israel, that's not dissimilar from the Biden administration. Like you said, that was down to maybe a handful of people by the end that were actually making all the decisions and that were sort of hanging their hat on a lot of these controversial moves. But in the Trump administration, you're seeing a repetition of that in many ways.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Connor Echols, reporter at Responsible Statecraft. You can read his latest piece on this very topic entitled How a Little-Known Embassy Aide Hijacked U.S.-Israel Policy, and we will put a link to that down below wherever people are listening to or watching this. Connor, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Emma.
Of course.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.